Hey there. Nvidia is reporting earnings in about an hour from now, a little bit over an hour. Everybody's excited. I'm excited and anxious as well. I don't know about you, but I thought it was worthwhile to have this monologue at this point of time. And if that's something of interest to you, the company, the industry, semiconductors, and AI. I cannot imagine that it's not of interest, but hopefully you find some value here. Before I get started, this is not investment advice. I'm not an investment advisor. I don't claim to be one. So watch this purely for education and entertainment purposes only. With that disclaimer out of the way, let's just jump into some of the things I want to share with you here. So, in about, like I said, a little bit over an hour, they're going to report earnings. Given everything that's going on in this space, there's no reason to believe that they're not going to have incredible numbers. I mean, surely that could be a surprise or a shock, but nobody's expecting that, right? So, uh, given that, let's see where they're at and where they probably might be, as from a price standpoint, and what learn a few things in the process, hopefully, right? Maybe most of this, if not more. But for those of you who might know just a little bit less than what I do, hopefully you find some value here. So let's just start with the current price, $197.18 at the time of this recording. It's about 2:45 in the afternoon on February 25th, which is my son's birthday. So happy birthday, Varun. So 2.25% up today. And if you look at the last, I don't know, maybe the last 5 days or perhaps even the last 10 days, let's go look at the chart here. And let's look at the last 10 days and see what's been going on. So let's say I go with February 17th, about a week, right? Just last Tuesday. They were $179 and they're about like, what is it, like $20 up? Yeah, right? No, not 20, like $18, which means 10% up. So they're 10% up in the last week. So they're running up to they clearly, as we get closer to earnings, they've done. There's been a bit of a rally here, right? They run up like 10% at this point. So I've seen that before earnings. Nvidia, excuse me, behaves this way, and then even if they report incredible numbers, which they've done more often than not, uh, the stock is not necessarily rewarded because it's probably caught up until that point. Now, who knows what's going to happen this afternoon? I have an opinion as to, excuse me, what might happen. Maybe I'll share it by the end of this recording. Maybe I won't. I don't know. So 10% up. So and their highest in the last, their all-time high was $212, and I think it was probably an intraday high because I think the close they never closed probably that high if I'm not wrong. So by the end of October, they were at $207 as the Seeking Alpha chart shows here. That's $10 off, right? So from where they are at currently, about 5% off. So they're just below 5% from their all-time high. So if Wall Street reacts positively to their numbers this afternoon, you can expect them to be somewhere around there, or perhaps even breach their all-time high. Or if they've done, quite a bit of catching up. Compared to the last 2 weeks or so or last month, then maybe there's not going to be much of an increase. So year to date they're about 4% up. In the last 6 months they've been about, they're 8% up. In the last 1 month about 5%, right? So from the start of the year, I mean, they've done as well as the index, I think, if not better than the index. So that's something to know. And in terms of their market cap, they're the highest, they're the biggest company out there in the world, $4.65 trillion. So if there's a 5% fluctuation, according to the, if I go to tip ranks and look at the options here, let's see what the options traders are expecting the movement to be. I think it's, hang on, expected earnings move. It says, it says 0%. Wow, I've never seen a 0%. Does that mean they're spot on as to where the earnings, maybe there won't be any activity or no fluctuation whatsoever? I don't know, right? But that's interesting because you look at anything else, for instance, I don't know, like if you go look at, I mean, they're not reporting earnings. Let's say look at Snowflake, right, which is reporting earnings today as well. You see that the options, the expected earnings moves like plus or minus 12%. That's a very interesting company as well. They've taken quite a bit of beating. They've done some catching up in the last, maybe today they're up 5.4%, but they've lost a lot of value there. But we won't talk about that because that's not the purpose of this podcast. So let's go back to Nvidia. This is very interesting that the earnings move, expected earnings moves like literally at 0%. So now that we're going, their forward P ratio, the price earnings ratio is about 40, which is higher than I've seen them in the past. But given that it's probably, I think the number might be a little bit lower than what Seeking Alpha is showing here, but it's not as low as it probably was like a little while ago. So, but that doesn't matter. Everyone is expecting Nvidia to just have a blowout quarter, like the Jensen Wang has done this like time and time again. And with all the hyperscalers reporting a large spend, their capex has just exploded. Amazon saying $200 billion is going to be their spend this year. I think Meta said $160 billion. Microsoft said something along those lines. I think the total spend is expected to be about $600 billion, right? Just from those large companies, the hyperscalers like Meta, Microsoft, Tesla, and Amazon, and a lot of the money is going nowhere else but to Nvidia. So on one side, there's no reason to expect that they would not have a blowout quarter. But on the other side, maybe some of it is baked into the price. So if you ask me personally, I'm thinking maybe a full 5% up or down, maybe not even down, right? If it is maybe 2%, -2%, or +4% is the range that I'm expecting, but we'll see how it goes. So that's a little bit of introduction. And then I pulled up, I did something here. If you see this chart here from bar chart, I just took Nvidia and compared Nvidia to a couple of companies like Amazon and Meta, and just try to see how the other companies are impacted from a stock price standpoint after Nvidia reports earnings. I was trying to draw a pattern here. I mean, there is some pattern, but nothing significant from what I could see. But there is some regardless. But let's look at it here. Let's look at a few things here. So I've taken the last three earnings reports, right? The last one was somewhere in November, and then a quarter before that. So that's actually why even speculate, right? So if I go to actually tip ranks and go to earnings, it'll tell me when the last few earnings reports have been. Yep, November 19th, August 27th, May 29th, right? So I've pulled those ones up here. And I just want to see something, right? Just a couple of numbers if that's of any interest to you. So the the orange here, if I'm getting the color right, is essentially Meta, and then this color is that pink. I know like eight colors. Beyond that, it's just ballparking it. But you see that here, right? Maybe a reddish pink or whatnot. That's Amazon, and then the blue is Nvidia essentially. So if you see here, Meta and Amazon. If I just hide Nvidia for a second, you'll see that the chart in the last year, I pulled up the last 1 year, it's reasonably been in sync, right? Which is interesting, right? Two hyperscalers, but different companies in terms of the business that they are in. Uh, One that's spending money on Nvidia and other chips, AI chips, to actually towards AWS where they actually monetize and make money, whereas for Meta it's a cost center. So there's while their spend is pretty big in that space, the way that spend reflects into their revenue and their earnings is quite different, right? Just because of the different businesses they are in. One is e-commerce and cloud. The other one is primarily making money through advertising. But then the chart does sync to a large extent, which is interesting in itself. But now let me unhide NVIDIA. I want to show you here. This here just tells you that there were 91 trading days between the two earnings reports, 90 trading days, and then 84 trading days, and so on. And it says the volume traded was 18 billion shares in two earnings quarters earlier. The one before the previous one, 11 billion shares traded, and the last one is 11 billion, right? So it's around there. So it used to be higher, like 18 billion, but it's dropped a fair bit in terms of the volume of shares traded on a daily basis, cumulatively in the 3 months in that quarter. But the thing I want you to see here, I think I also added Broadcom's numbers here. We'll look at it shortly. Between, I guess between the quarter, which was, when is this, right? This is March 20, February 2025 to March 2025, Nvidia has gone up about 5.96%, right? About 6% they went up in the 3 months. Between May and then September, they went up 30, almost 35%, 34.5. And then between August or September and November of last year, they went up about 2.89%. And then since November, I guess we can see what's been happening since November of last year. I mean, yeah, it's pretty much the same, right? 1 or 2%, right? There's hardly any change essentially. So if and they're going to report earnings shortly, right? So let's say about 2.5% maybe. So again, one more time, the 3 quarters earlier, the increase was about 6%, between two earnings reports, and then it was 34.5%, and then 2.89, and now it's about 2%, right? So the only time we've seen in the last 4 quarters, in the last 12 months, where they've seen a significant increase between earnings reports has been between May and August or September of last year, which was 35%. Just keep that in mind. And after they reported earnings, I just looked to see what happened with regards to Meta or Amazon, for instance. There's not I mean, they've acted in sync, in unison, both Amazon and Microsoft, after Nvidia's reported earnings. But there's not any significant upward or downwards movement from what I'm seeing here, right? I mean, I haven't gotten to the specific numbers, but just looking at the graph loosely, it doesn't seem to have had a lot of impact, both either on the upside or on the downside. Perhaps a few days later or a week, that's different. I'm just saying immediately, the day or two after they've reported earnings, from what I can tell from the chart here. But if you take Broadcom as an example, right? Broadcom is also in the business of making chips, just different kind of AI chips, which is ASIC, the application specific integrated circuit ASIC chips, which are more geared towards specific applications as opposed to GPUs that are generic, AI chips. So they in the few days after Nvidia reported earnings, like 3 quarters ago, Broadcom went up 10%. The last time, I guess, let's say from August 27th to, you look at the arrow here, about a week or two later, they were up 23%. And then the most recent quarter that they report earnings, between November 19th to December 10th, again, another 2.5 weeks, they've gone up 18%. So it's interesting. While it doesn't seem to have had a lot of impact on, like, say, Amazon or Meta as two seemingly random companies I'm comparing here too, Broadcom, which is also a chip maker, has had quite a bit of upwards movement in the last, a couple of weeks after Nvidia's reported earnings. But that could also be because, now that I think about it, Broadcom's earnings typically tend to come out. Let's see when Broadcom's expected to report earnings. Yeah, it's actually in a week from now. So you know what? Take what I'm saying there with a grain of salt. It may or may not be because Nvidia reported earnings, and it could be simply because Broadcom reported earnings and they've shown just good numbers. We look at Broadcom more specifically, probably in a different video. But for now, given the fact that Broadcom's reporting earnings, or has been reporting earnings, about a week after Nvidia, it clearly looks like a couple of weeks after that they've gone up 10%, 23%, and 18%. So make of it what you will. And Broadcom, while we won't talk much about it here, is also at a good price point. They've had a fairly significant drop. So maybe we'll see this pattern repeat, for all we know. Maybe 2 weeks from today, maybe the second week or the end of first of March, maybe Broadcom's going to be like 10% higher than where they are at today. We'll see. Maybe I'll do a video at that point and we can revisit that. So those are some things I want to share from the charts here. But let's actually keep going, right? There's a few more things I want to share with you from an Nvidia standpoint. Let's see. Let's see what I have here. Okay, a few other, I did a couple other searches here just to share that with you. So Nvidia customers, while if you do a quick search, your revenue by customer, it tells you the breakdown. Doesn't tell you which customer exactly, but it's one of those big customers like the ones we talked about: Meta, Amazon, and Microsoft, and whatnot. The top two to six customers, it says your top six customers accounted for 85% of total revenue. That's an insanely concentrated number. That's because to spend that kind of money, you need to have that kind of money, and it's only the hyperscalers seem to clearly have that kind of money. So So they said that they're spending a lot of money on capex, and they're spending a lot of that money, if not most, or a lot of, I mean, most of it on Nvidia. So there's no real surprise from an Nvidia earnings standpoint, right? Because you know that those companies reported spend, and we know that the money is going towards Nvidia. So it's not so much a surprise there. There could be other news about how much they expect to make from China sales, and maybe outside of data center gaming sales, and automotive and whatnot. So those things could make some difference, but generally speaking, you have some ideas to what they might even report. Their sales is concentrated, as you can see here. Most of the money is coming from these hyperscalers. So if any time they decide to pull back, if they we can talk about depreciation on those AI chips, and what Michael Burry thinks versus what some of these companies report on their earnings reports as to what the depreciation might be. You know, I won't go into it at least right now, but a lot of those come play a role here. But if any of these companies decide to pull back on their spend, then obviously it's going to have a significant impact on Nvidia. But we haven't seen any signs of it whatsoever in the last 6 to 12 to 18 months, right? So that's where, right, their revenue concentration is. So let me just close that tab, and then we can go to the next one just to see the reported net income. um, I guess their revenue in the last quarter, I guess in the last year, right, 2025, was $130 billion, right, total revenue. Of that, $72 billion, which is about like 50% to 65, about 55% maybe, was their income, which means their operating margin is pretty high. I think, I don't know if I have the numbers here. So they, unlike Amazon, part of their sales, a lot of their revenue comes from e-commerce, but then the margin's very low, under 10%. Nvidia has a pretty good margin, but that operating margin, I believe, has been decreasing, right? It was much higher maybe a year or two ago, and as they sell more, maybe that's, you would expect economies of scale, but probably not. There's other things that probably play a role there, but I believe that number is actually coming down. So that's something to keep an eye on, right? Because that market does react strongly to margin compression. So just keep that in mind, $72 billion. And then let's see, Nvidia, what they're expecting to report this time. I believe they're expecting to report like over 60% higher compared to last year, year over year. But that's their revenue expectation and income expectation. Okay, let me close that. And in this chart here, thanks to stock analysis, this shows Nvidia's revenue by segment. And as you can see here, in the most recent quarter that they reported, the data center revenue, I think the total revenue was like what, 106, was it like 170 some billion dollars? Out of that, $166 billion, right? Which is pretty much almost all of it, minus $14 billion on gaming and $2 billion on, it says, professional visualization revenue. I don't know what that is. Automotive and robotics, I mentioned that earlier. And then original equipment manufacturers and other revenues, $500 million, right? So if you add the rest of them up, 14, uh, 16, 18, about give or take $20 billion. That's about 12%. So 88% of the revenue is coming from the data center. That's literally where the breadwinner, right? That's where their money is coming from. And I live in Northern Virginia, and I see all of these data centers come up. So I'm not surprised at all, just by the growth of these data centers and the amount of space each one seems to occupy. So as we can tell here, the data center revenue is pretty much what's most important. But again, if they show increases in the other segments, right? It's not going to hurt. Now they can show significant percentage increases. They could say there's a 20% increase on robotics, but that would only mean $400 million. But any increase in the data center revenue is going to clearly add to their top and bottom line here. So keep that in mind, the data center revenue and the breakdown between the other segments. Let's keep going. I'm going to keep closing as I talk about these things here. Okay, the AI chip market, it's currently dominated by GPUs, and Nvidia is in the business of making GPUs. It says the AI chip market, dominated by GPUs, holds about 75 to 80% of the market share, and largely due to Nvidia's overwhelming presence. So within the GPU market, I think Nvidia probably has maybe 90% of the market, if I'm not wrong. The ASIC chips, the one we talked about with the one that Broadcom makes in Marvel, is another company that does that. They are about 20 to 25%. Of the 20-25%, Marvel is the market, Broadcom is the market leader there, maybe 60 or 70%, if I'm not wrong. And then with Marvel having like 10, 15, maybe 20% or something like that, maybe lesser. So that's the breakdown, right? So the GPU market, of the GPU market, of the AI chip market, GPUs make up 75 to 80%. And the other 20-25% is ASICs. And of the 75 to 80%, about 90% of it, if I'm not wrong, is essentially Nvidia's market share. Let's see if there's, yep, it says Nvidia maintains over 90% of the AI chip, GPU chip market share. So if you looked at the totality of it, right, 75% is GPUs, and 90% of 75, which is less, what, 67%, is essential, which is 60. So 75%, let's say go with 75% is as the market share on the GPU space. 90% of that 75 is 67%. So of the overall AI chip market, over two-thirds of the market is Nvidia's market share. So that's an incredibly insane number in any industry for that matter, even if you're selling food or salads, for instance. But now, given the fact that you're selling high margin, really expensive AI chips, and then that's clearly where all of the spend is there from these hyperscaler standpoint, and that's where the future seemingly appears to be in. You can see where they stand in the grand scheme of things, right? That's an incredible place to be in. But of course, they're also $4.5 trillion as a company. Those numbers, take it for what it's worth. When Apple hit the 1 trillion, everyone's like, oh my God, can a single company be 1 trillion? And then they became two, then three, and then more companies joined that space, like Amazon and Meta and Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing, TSMC, and Alphabet, and Tesla, and I don't know if I missed any there. Microsoft, obviously, right? So there's lots of them in the $1 trillion space. So maybe Nvidia becomes a $5 trillion company one more time tonight, this evening, or maybe a $6 trillion company, or maybe they just stay where they are at, and maybe there's, they just trade, sideways in the near future. We shall see. But that's an incredibly important number as well. So let's look at the total addressable market for AI chips. It's expected to grow. The AI chip market today, as of this year, at the time of this recording, says it's about $120 billion. It's going to go to like 1 trillion. I think it's going to go to like $300 billion, which is almost 3 times in the next 4 years, and then to $1 trillion, which is like 8 times in the next decade. So 8 times. So imagine 8 times, and if Nvidia can stick to their current market share, or even if they lose some to competitors like AMD and Marvell in the GPU space, and to Broadcom and AMD and AMD in the GPU space, and then Broadcom and Marvell, in the ASIC space. Even if they lose some of their market share, but if the market grows by eight folds, you can still see how significant a player they're going to be and what their market share might potentially even be in the next 10 years. And TSMC is one of the most important companies there, because they are making these chips for all of these AI companies, and which is why if you look at their share price, we'll talk about them in a different video, that they've had an incredible run up until this point this year, and probably it's going to continue. So the total addressable market is huge, but again, a lot of that has to come from these hyperscalers. So they're going to have to continue to spend that kind of money, and they've been penalized for spending that money. You can check Amazon's price or Microsoft's price or even Meta's price. They have taken a beating because they're continuing to spend this money, because they may or may not, they're reporting great numbers, but the market's like, hey, are you getting the return on investment that you're expecting or hoping to see? How do you explain your spend here? So we'll have to see how it goes in terms of how much they're going to continue to spend, what the depreciation on those chips is going to look like. Is it 4 years, like Michael Burry and other people say, I believe, or is it 6 years, like these companies report in their earnings report? How does that pan out? And can this sustain, right? Or is there going to be a period of time where they're going to be all right with the chips, with the versions that they currently own, and they're not going to keep upgrading and refreshing to Nvidia's new releases? But again, Nvidia's conference, the GTC, I think is going to come up in the next week or so, and they're going to release a bunch of different products. So that's another thing to keep in mind. So let's close this. Let's look at operating margin. So Nvidia's operating margin, what did I say earlier? Let's see. Yep, annual operating margin was 62%. I think I said 45 or something looking at the numbers there, but it looks like it's 62, but maybe they've had some other expense in other segments and other spaces, which is why that number is higher here as opposed to what I said earlier. But 62, which I believe was over 70% not too long ago. But it says projection management aims to keep those margins in the mid 70% range, which I think was what they were earlier, and then it dropped, and maybe they're going to go up again. And if they can show margins increasing here, meaning for every dollar that they make in revenue, they're able to make more earnings, more profits, right? In terms of income, then the market's going to be mighty pleased. So it's how much money they make and how much revenue they have in each of the segments, particularly in the data center space, what their margins looking like, and if what their projection is going to be, or what their guidance is going to look like. And I think they've more often than not, they've done a top and bottom line beat, and then they've guided better as well. But then the next day or two, in the last three quarters at least, I don't think the it's gone up a whole lot immediately following their reports, right? Let's see. Let me go back to tip ranks and let me pull up Nvidia here. I think the day after earnings, in the last three quarters, let's see how it goes, right? Yeah, you see the last four earnings, they've actually dropped 3%, 0.7 to 3%, almost an 8.4%. But we also saw here, right, between the quarter before the last one, they had gone up 34.5% till that point. So there was a drop. In the most recent quarter, they were up only under 3%, and there was still a 3% drop, which means they probably lost those gains. And now in the last 3 months, they've gained close to under 3%, and we'll see what happens. And especially in the last 10 days, they've gone up like about a 10%. Oops, that's AI in 2026 is not for this video. It's something I'm going to be recording shortly. So I think I think we can call this wraps here. So shared a bunch of things with you. Just to do a quick recap: Nvidia reporting earnings in the next 60 minutes, less than 60 minutes from now. A lot of these hyperscalers, Meta, Microsoft, Amazon, and everybody spending a ton of money. As they've reported in the recent quarters, they took a beating. Wall Street was not particularly pleased with the amount of money they're spending on capex, and most of that money, if not all of it, is going towards AI spend, and which means Nvidia for the most part. And given that Nvidia is expected to report some really good numbers, they're probably going to beat the top and bottom line and probably have a good guidance. Now the question is the market going to reward them, or is it going to be like lateral move, meaning -2% or +4%, which is the range I'm expecting to see, -2 to +4. Let's see how right or wrong I am here. Their operating margins pretty healthy. The total addressable market is just going to keep increasing about three folds in the next 4 years, and eight folds in the next decade. They have 75% of the AI chip market share goes to GPUs. Of that, 90% of it is Nvidia's market share. So unless AMD is going to do some catching up, which they can, because Meta signed a contract with them, and we saw that news yesterday, and AMD went up like a 10%, I think yesterday, if I'm not wrong. So there's a lot happening in the space. And if you want to keep in touch with what's going on, subscribe to our newsletters. Download our app, the Snowpal app. Manage your projects, whether it be at home or at school or in college or at work. Check out our APIs on AWS Marketplace. Build your software systems in real quick time at low cost using the current suite of AI tools and technologies alongside the Snowpal APIs. You're going to be able to do a lot more things in much shorter time at a lot lesser cost, and with minimal risk, if any, right? Given the combination of what's available to you, and with really small engineering and dev teams. So definitely check out our product suite. You can either sign up on AWS Marketplace and start integrating our APIs in 2 to 3 minutes from the time you sign up, and it takes less than 2 minutes to sign up. Or you can also purchase the APIs and buy a commercial license for as low as $5,000 from where they start, and deploy them in your own infrastructure. That's about it for now. Let's see how it goes with the Nvidia earnings and whatnot. Talk soon. Have a good evening.